Is it really possible to retire comfortably at 60 with just $500,000 saved? Today we're breaking down the numbers to find out. In this video, we're going to dig into both the potential and the pitfalls of retiring with $500,000 in the bank. From realistic spending scenarios to smart investment moves, we'll explore how far $500K can actually stretch and what changes you might need to make to ensure it lasts. If you're approaching retirement and wondering if your savings are enough, or if you just want a reality check, stay tuned. We're diving into all the details to help you map out a successful plan for your golden years on a tight budget. Welcome back to Simply Money. Today we are talking about, can you retire at 60 with $500,000 of investable assets? We're not talking about net worth. We're not talking about houses. You may have some equity in your house that could be used in a different way. We're not talking about that. We're going to go on a very basic scenario of you have $500,000 to invest. You own your home. It is paid for. And then we're going to look at your budget and the $500,000, how it's invested, along with Social Security, and what that will do for you. And I want to show you an example of how this can be broken down. If you're not there yet, you're nervous, you're wondering, how could this actually work for me? The first thing I always tell people, and I get a kick out of it when I see these YouTube channels, and I know some of it's a little clickbait, they'll say, can you retire on $500,000? Well, that's really not the question. The first question you have to ask is, what is your retirement budget going to be? What is your expense in retirement going to be? Without that, it doesn't matter. You could have $10 million and it not be enough if your expenses are so outrageous that $10 million won't cover it. So, not taking it to that extreme, but if you need $100,000 or $50,000, there's a big difference on how much you need invested. Can you retire with $500,000 needing $100,000 a year? I'm going to say no. Could that happen? Sure. In a perfect world, the stock market does perfect, your sequence of returns is perfect. Sure, you could make that happen. I highly doubt it, and I would never recommend that. But now $50,000, can you retire with $500,000 in the bank? Yes, I believe you can. Now, there's still some things you're going to have to watch for. There's some pitfalls to be aware of, but that's what we're going to dive in here today and look at. So let's start out over on this chart here. We have the balance we're going to go with is $500,000. Now, I don't have this included in this balance, but they have about a 6-month expense emergency fund in the bank, just in a savings account. It's off to the side. We're not counting that, because we're not investing that. We're talking about investable assets, and your emergency fund really isn't investable because you need it handy. So it's just trying to keep up with inflation, keeping high yield savings or somewhere where you can get to it today if you need it. It's not really there for growth. It's there for an emergency. So they have about $25,000, $30,000 sitting off to the side there. So in reality, they have $525,000. But we're talking about the investable part. They have $500,000, and it's just in a regular brokerage account, not a 401k, not an IRA. It is taxable. So that's something that will have to be considered in this. Their annual income that they want is $55,000. And this is including a little bit of money for entertainment and travel. Their bare bones budget is right around $45,000, $44,000 something it was. That extra $10,000 is for entertainment, traveling, doing things throughout the year. That is something that can be adjusted if need be in this scenario if we see that maybe $55,000 is too much. Or some things we'll look at here in a moment, the sequence of return. Maybe they retire at 60. And I want to clarify, the one spouse is 60, the other is 58. So we have that a 2-year difference in when the Social Security kicks in for them. I want to clarify that. We're going to play around a little bit with the amount that the investment is getting with dividends and the amount of the total return of the growth of the actual stocks that they're invested in, the ETFs. We're going to start Social Security for the first person at 62. 2 years later, the second person. Their estimated amounts will be $1,600, and then spousal support, which is half of that. So, $2,400 combined for both of them. And we've put in a standard 3% inflation year over year. Here's a couple things I want to talk to you about. I've gone very conservative on the rate of return based on the investments that they have. I also want to show you that inflation is 3%. That means the amount that they need for annual income every year goes up 3%. I don't believe that's how life works, because at 60, they may be spending more. They may be going out to eat more. They may be traveling more, that $10,000 that we put in there for travel. At 70, maybe they're still doing it. At 80, they're probably not still spending at that same amount. And we're going to look how that increases each year, the spending. We're actually maybe around 70, 75, maybe even 80. The amount of income may go down. As they say, you kind of have your go-go years, your slow-go years, and your no-go years. Over a 30-year period of retirement, your first 10 years or so are go-go. You're excited, you're retired, you're a little bit younger, a little bit more energetic, and you're doing more. Then you slow down a little bit. Maybe you're not traveling quite as much. Whatever the case may be, you're slowing down a little bit. And then as you get your retirement, you're 25, 30 years into it, you're kind of into the no-go years. You're still doing some stuff, but you've slowed down. You're kind of enjoying the slower pace of life. And the expenses typically go down versus what they were when you first retired. But we put that as an inflation rate of 3% as going all the way through all 30 years. In fact, this chart goes up until 100. I don't think most people need to plan on the retirement lasting to 100, but I would personally feel more comfortable going there, because if something happens to me, I want to make sure my wife is taken care of. And so this is what we're doing with this scenario, that we're going to go to 100 years old. Let's look at with these numbers put in, you can see the chart that I created here, just a quick glance. You can see that it actually increases, and then later, up into the 90s, it starts decreasing. The starting balance at $500,000, there's no Social Security for either person. Dividends at the 2.5% rate would pay $12,500. And so they need to take out $42,000 of investments from that. They're getting their dividends or paying, but then they need an additional $42,000. That's an 8.5% withdrawal rate. That is a little bit high. I don't feel super comfortable with that, but you gotta remember, this is only for a couple years to get Social Security to kick in. We'll play with some things to see what could happen and what may need to happen depending on life. We can plan for the future, but we don't know until we get there, so we have to be flexible. Don't let your retirement plan not go into effect because you feel like it has to be static. Make a plan, but be flexible. Like I said, we could drop this down to $45,000 if need be. Maybe they go 1 year, they don't travel, but they want to stay retired and they just do local stuff that's not expensive. Whatever the case may be, they make adjustments. Maybe the rate of return for the first couple years is 10%, which is not unheard of. You could get 20%, but it could also be negative 10%. So we have to watch that sequence of return, and we'll be looking at that in a Monte Carlo here in a moment. But just as you can see, the portfolio would grow, and this is just, again, a static approach to this. This is just how it would break down if things were static. They're not going to be static. So we're going to run a Monte Carlo in conjunction with this. But on this scenario, you could see that a person could retire with $500,000 at age 60, their spouse, again, 2 years younger at 58, and then their Social Security would kick in at 62. The first person would be $19,200. The second person, nothing. You go up here to 64 for the main person, $20,000, and then $9,600 for Social Security number 2. So dividends are, looking at the 64-year-old here, dividends are right at $12,000. That have to withdraw $18,000 now instead of that $42,000, because we have these both Social Securities kicking in. So you can see what happened here. After the first 2 years, the withdrawal rate was a little bit high, but then when the first Social Security kicked in, it dropped down to 5.4. Then when the second Social Security kicked in, it dropped down to 3.79. And then you can see also the income at this year, now they need almost 62,000 because of this inflation of 3%. What they were living on here in their first year of retirement, their spending power stays the same because it increases with inflation. And we can play with this. We could put in 6%. You can see how that impacts that. If inflation hits hard and stays high for a long period of time, that drastically changes things. But on average, long-term inflation rate is 3%. Same with this. We can drop this down to maybe things over your retirement go a little bit south. So it's only 5% return. And you got to add the dividend in with that. So it's a 7.5% return combined. You can see down here, they'd run out of money around 90, 91. That'd make the spouse 88, 89, depending on the situation. It does reduce that comfort a little bit, but look at what happens if instead of 6%, you got 7%. Well, now they're not running out of money. If they live to 100, now they're down with 2.2 million. As you go into retirement, go in with a plan. And so our plan is that this is what we're anticipating. This is what we have. This is what we need. This is the dividend, and this is what we anticipate our return to be, but we're flexible. If this is down, maybe we spend a little bit less. If this is down, maybe you pick up a part-time job and make an extra $5,000 a year to reduce that impact. You go work 1 day a week doing a little something to make a little bit of cash. Maybe that's where your travel money comes from. This is really high, especially early on. Maybe you give yourself a little more liberty to enjoy spending a little bit more. So you have to play it year by year and reevaluate, but you can set up a plan and see here that with $500,000 needing $55,000 a year with a 6% return and a 2.5% yield dividend in their Social Security, they would be fine. Now, again, they have to be putting guardrails up. Let's look at the Monte Carlo. We have the $500,000 here. They need $30,000 in withdrawals. And on this one, I'm skipping the 2 years prior to that. So what we're going to do, just to make it a little bit more close, we're going to put $475,000 because that's where we're going to anticipate them to be after those 2 years before the first Social Security kicks in. It's adjusted for inflation. This amount they need annually of $30,000 will go up with inflation each year. And we're going to run this for 30 years on the Monte Carlo. Let's run that for 40 to 100, just like we did on the other one. And we're going to put no sequence of return adjustment. This is going to run 10,000 scenarios. It'd be like 10,000 people with the same money, with the same investment strategy. And what they have is SCHD 60% and SCHG 40%. This is just what there is. I would recommend diversifying a little bit more than this, but this is what they have. They're comfortable with that because this SCHD doesn't have as much upside as like the S&P 500 or SCHG, but it also doesn't have as big of a downside. Its beta is lower. Like in 2022, SCHG was down maybe, I think it was 18%. SCHD was only down like 5%, but buffers a little bit of that downside and caps a little bit of the upside. That's their mix. And so we run this simulation, 10,000 scenarios. They have a 95% chance of survival. Now, what I like to look at that is, it means 9,532 portfolios out of 10,000 survived this $30,000. Don't forget they have Social Security, so they get that as well. Taking out of that $500,000, the $30,000 a year, 95% of them survived. What about that other 5%? That's where you have to be a little bit more adjusting. Maybe things didn't work quite as well for you. Maybe you're one of the 5%. Maybe you have to drop that down to another 1,000 that you don't spend. Or maybe one year you just reduce your spending because the returns are low. There's just things you have to adjust as you're going along. Now, I want to do one thing here to show you the sequence of returns. We didn't adjust that, but we're going to say the first 2 years are the worst years. So the first 2 years you retire, and then the stock market goes down, like 2022 went down. And we're going to say that happened for 2 years and see how that changes your success rate, your probability. With the first 2 years, nothing else has changed. Now you drop down to 82%, which is still not bad for a portfolio, Monte Carlo simulation. 82% is not bad. It's a little lower than maybe I would like. Just means that 18% of the time you would have to be flexible. And in this scenario, we put the first 2 years as the worst years. Maybe you do retire and the stock market goes belly up for 2 years. It's down 20% or 10%, whatever the case might be. It's down. Maybe the first 2 years, you don't travel as much. You just enjoy the slower lifestyle. Or maybe that's where you pick up a part-time job. You make an adjustment temporarily. It doesn't mean you're not retired. It just means that you're not completely done with working. But isn't it better than waiting and continuing to work full-time until you're 62 for Social Security to kick in? Perhaps you have to make that choice. Maybe you love your job. You say, hey, I'm just going to wait till 62. Then I don't have to worry as much. I won't be quite as concerned, especially early on. 10 years down the road, you know much better what's going on, and you can make those adjustments easier. Let's say we had first 5 years are the worst. Now it's going to be a huge difference here. You're going to see this is where maybe, okay, things aren't looking so good here. We're down to 12% survival rate, but the stock market's never been down 5 years in a row. So I use that as an extreme example. That's bigger problems. I always tell my wife, if you have a Great Depression situation, the year you retire, we have bigger problems than where are we going on vacation or where are we going to travel this year. Our society would be in upheaval and we'd have bigger concerns than being retired. That's where you have to make adjustments and not let the doom and gloom, the world's coming to an end mentality keep you from exploring the possibility of retiring. Back to the spreadsheet that I created, we can punch in any numbers here and get a feel of what it's going to be like to be retired with certain numbers. Leave me a comment. How much do you anticipate having? What's your Social Security, you and or your spouse? Let me know a little bit of basic information like that. If you want to share like your mix, like your portfolio, like this one was 60% SCHD, 40% FCHG. If you want to share that, I'd be glad to run this along with the Monte Carlo and do another video for you. But this one is at 60 years old, $500,000, needing $55,000 a year. Can you retire? Absolutely you can. You just have to be flexible. You can't go into it like, oh, well, 3 years down the road, I still get to spend this no matter what. That's not how life works. Even when you're working, it doesn't work like that. I have an income. I have a job. My wife, your spouse, they have a job, and things happen in life. You don't spend as much. Maybe somebody gets sick. Maybe a car crashes. Maybe your house has a major repair it needs. Whatever the case might be, life goes on, and you make adjustments. This year you didn't take vacation, or this year you didn't do the home improvement. You make adjustments and fiddle with your budget and reassess things and then move forward. You're not setting your budget today. When you were 30 years old, you didn't set your budget until you were 60. Okay, here's my budget. This is what it's going to be for the next 30 years. You redo it. You should be looking at it quarterly, obviously budgeting monthly, but reevaluating it quarterly at minimum, annually, doing it once a year. Okay, here's where we were at the end of the year. This is what we planned. This is where we ended up. This is where things are at. This is how the portfolio is doing. Where can we make adjustments? And we make some minor tweaks and we move forward and we keep reevaluating. And after a few years, you start seeing, has the market been good, bad, indifferent, and where are we at? How are we progressing? Again, this is planning to 100. I'll be honest, I don't expect to live to be 100. There's not that kind of longevity in my family. If I do, great. If my wife does, great. She's taken care of. In this scenario, whoever this person is, are they going to be taken care of? Do they have anything else? Do they have life insurance? There's different factors. Everyone's going to be different. This isn't me telling you if you have this and need that, you can go retire. This is just a overview, a generic overview, and you need to look at it personally because finances are personal and everybody's situation is different. So leave a comment if you have any questions, any thoughts, and hit that like and subscribe button. It helps us continue to push forward videos. Doesn't cost anything to hit that subscribe, like button. Share it with a friend if you'd like. Those things help us and get us more views so we can help produce more videos for you. So thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next time on Simply Money.